Okay, ready to dive deep into personality research. Like, how do psychologists actually figure out what makes us tick?
It's like solving a puzzle, right?
Exactly. And it turns out they use these four types of clues, almost like a personality code.
Think of it as building a personality profile. But not just from one source, we're going to mix it up with different types of data. Each gives us a different piece of the puzzle.
All right, so let's break it down. First up, we've got self-report data, or S data. Pretty straightforward, right? You just ask someone about themselves.
Yeah, it's all about self-judgments. Think personality quizzes, surveys, anything where you're rating your own traits.
Makes sense. But are we always the best judge of character? I mean, I know I have my blind spots.
That's a challenge with S data for sure. We can be biased. We might try to make ourselves look better without realizing it.
Or maybe just not see those quirks that everyone else notices.
Right. It's called the fish in water effect. Imagine a fish swimming around. They don't even realize they're in water, right? We can be like that with our own personalities.
Ha, love that analogy. You know what's fascinating? Our sources say that even a 5-year-old can give pretty accurate self-judgments. By 12, they're even better.
Shows how self-awareness develops, something researchers always have to consider. And even if we're not perfectly accurate, our self-beliefs still matter, right? They shape how we act and how others see us. It's that causal force of S data.
Interesting. So even a slightly off self-perception has real-world effects. Okay, so what about getting a second opinion? That's where informant data comes in, or I data.
Exactly, like calling in witnesses who know you well, friends, family, colleagues, get their take on your personality.
So crowdsourcing your personality profile.
Yeah, you could say that. And get this, eye data even works for, get this, chimps, dogs, even octopuses.
Wait, octopus personalities? I never thought about that.
It shows just how fundamental judgments from others are, like it's built into social life across species.
Okay, so I data, getting insights from different contexts, seems super valuable. Does that make it automatically more reliable than S data?
Not always. Data has its own quirks. For example, a family member might be a little too nice, whereas like a coworker you don't get along with could be too critical.
So it's like that Shakespeare quote, reputation is an idle and most false imposition. But even if it's not perfect, it matters.
Totally. Our sources point out how others' perceptions can actually shape who you become. It's called the expectancy effect. If people keep expecting you to be sharp, you might actually end up conforming to that expectation.
So I data can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's kind of trippy. Okay, moving on to life outcome data, or L data. This sounds like some serious detective work.
Exactly. We're talking real-world facts you can get from public records or even self-report. Your job history, relationship status, even, get this, your driving record.
Hold on. Are you saying my parking tickets say something about my personality?
Well, it's not about judging one event, but researchers have found some interesting correlations. One study linked messy bedrooms to lower scores on conscientiousness.
Okay, that hits a little too close to home. But I see how your life choices could reflect those underlying personality traits.
Exactly. It gives us that objective record, but we have to remember L data is influenced by a lot of things, not just personality. Like a divorce could be caused by lots of factors, not necessarily personality clashes.
So it's like piecing together a puzzle, but with some pieces missing, maybe even from a different box. Okay, last but not least, behavioral data, or B data. This sounds like the most action-packed one.
This one is about directly observing behavior. It could be watching someone in a natural setting, putting them through a lab experiment, even using tech like the ER.
The ER.
Yeah, it's a device that records little bits of sound throughout the day.
Hold on, a device that basically eavesdrops on you for science. That's kind of cool and creepy at the same time.
Definitely a powerful tool, but it's got challenges too. Figuring out the meaning behind behavior can be tricky, like is giving a gift generosity, wanting to impress, or even manipulation.
So context matters. It's like those optical illusions.
Totally. And B, data, just like the others, has limitations. Collecting it can be expensive and time-consuming.
You can't exactly follow everyone around with a film crew. But even with those limitations, all four types, S data, I data, L data, and B data, give us different pieces of that puzzle.
Absolutely. It's about using them strategically and critically to build that full picture.
Okay, we've covered how researchers gather data, but how do they make sure it's good data?
It's like building a house, right? You need solid materials. In research, we talk about reliability and validity. Reliability is all about consistency, like a scale that gives you the same weight every time, even if it's the wrong weight.
That's like that friend who's always late, but you can only count on them to be late. Reliable, but not a good thing.
Ha. Exactly. Now, validity is about making sure we're measuring what we think we're measuring. Like if we're trying to measure sociability, are we actually capturing that, or just if someone likes parties?
So a test that says it's measuring creativity, but really it's just measuring how good you are at taking tests. Reliable, but not so valid.
Perfect example.
So it's not just about numbers, it's about the meaning behind them and making sure those measurements are both consistent and accurate.
Exactly. And that's where research designs come in. They're like blueprints for how we collect and analyze that data.
Our sources mention three main types: case studies, experiments, and correlational studies. What are the differences?
Think of it this way. A case study is like a super in-depth biography. We learn everything about a specific person or event, like the NTSB investigations after a plane crash. They go deep into every detail.
Right, so case studies give us that deep dive, but might not apply to everyone.
Exactly. That's where experiments and correlational studies come in. They help us test hypotheses more broadly. Experiments are like those science experiments in school. You change one thing to see how it affects something else.
Like if you wanted to see if stress affects, I don't know, test scores, you could have one group all stressed out and one relaxed. Then compare the results.
You got it. You're controlling variables to see the effects. The tricky part is sometimes it's unethical or just impossible to manipulate things in an experiment.
Right, you can't ethically, expose someone to trauma just to study the effects. That's where correlational studies come in.
Yeah, they look at relationships between things that already exist. We could measure natural stress levels and test performance to see if they're connected.
But every catch, right? Doesn't correlation just mean there's a connection, not that one thing causes the other?
You're sharp. Correlation doesn't equal causation. It's a trap we can all fall into.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine a study finds a correlation between being extroverted and being happy. Easy to think, oh, being extroverted makes you happy. But it could be that happy people are just naturally more outgoing. Or there's another factor, like good social support, affecting both.
So it's a tangled web, hard to figure out the exact cause and effect.
You got it. It's complex. And while correlational research can't definitively prove causation, it's super valuable for exploring relationships and getting new ideas.
It sounds like both experimental and correlational studies have their pros and cons, not about picking a winner, but choosing the right tool for the job.
Absolutely. Experiments are great for testing cause and effect in a controlled setting. Correlational studies show us how personality works in the real world.
It's like having two lenses to look at personality. One zooms in, the other gives us that wide-angle view.
Exactly. And this idea of using different perspectives brings us to triangulation.
Triangulation, tell me more.
It means we can get a better, more complete picture by combining different data sources and methods, like using a compass, map, and GPS to find your location.
So instead of one piece of evidence, you're looking for confirmation from multiple sources.
Exactly. If we see consistent patterns across S data, I data, B data, and different designs, we can be more confident in the results.
It's like building a legal case. More evidence from different places makes your argument stronger.
I like that. It shows how personality research is a process, constantly refining our understanding.
This is starting to feel like the whole nature versus nurture debate. Are we figuring out how much personality comes from our genes versus our upbringing?
Great connection. The experimental versus correlational debate often touches on similar ideas. Experimental methods, all about manipulating variables, sometimes feel like a nurture approach, like we're shaping personality.
While correlational studies observing natural relationships maybe lean more towards nature, acknowledging that some traits are, already there and stable.
Exactly. But just like ninja versus nurture has evolved to recognize that genes and environment work together, the experimental and correlational debate isn't either or.
It's about recognizing both approaches give us valuable insights, and they're most powerful when used together.
Yes, and that brings us back to the power of triangulation. By mixing data from different sources, we start to see the big picture of what shapes who we are.
This has been a great deep dive into personality research so far. We've explored those four types of data: reliability, validity, those core research designs, and the big debate between experimental and correlational approaches.
And through it all, we've seen how researchers use science, creativity, and curiosity to understand this amazing thing: human personality.
It's like we've peeked into the toolbox of personality detectives.
And the story's not over yet. We'll get into real-world applications of all this research next time and leave you with some questions to ponder. Welcome back to our deep dive, where we're tackling this big question: experimental versus correlational research designs. Each has its strengths, kind of like Coke versus Pepsi for researchers.
Yeah, each side has its fans. So what makes each approach so compelling?
Well, with experiments, you can really pinpoint cause and effect. You manipulate one thing, watch its impact, and control for other factors. Powerful stuff.
So it's like a chef trying out a new recipe. Change one ingredient at a time to see how it affects the dish.
Perfect analogy. It isolates those effects, like shining a spotlight on one little piece of personality to see how it works.
But doesn't all that control make experiments feel a bit artificial? Like, how much can we really learn about personality out in the real world from a lab setting?
That's one of the criticisms for sure. That whole lack of ecological validity, meaning what we see in the lab doesn't always match up with real life.
It's like studying animals in a zoo. You learn something, but it's not the whole picture of how they act in the wild.
Exactly. Plus, there are always ethical concerns. Some experiments need deception, or they might make people uncomfortable. Researchers have to walk a fine line.
Right, you can't just mess with people's lives for science. Okay, so experiments give you control, but they have those limitations. What about correlational studies then? What are their strengths?
One big advantage is they capture personality dynamics in real-world settings. No artificial scenarios, we're seeing how traits play out naturally.
Like being a fly on the wall, watching personality in all its messy glory.
Exactly. That real-world focus gives them high ecological validity. Plus, they can often handle way larger and more diverse samples than experiments, making the findings more applicable to everyone.
But we got to be careful about jumping to conclusions, right? Just because two things are correlated doesn't mean one causes the other.
The golden rule: correlation does not equal causation. Even the best researchers can fall into that trap.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, let's say a study finds a link between extroversion and happiness. It's tempting to say, oh, being extroverted makes you happy. But maybe happy people are just more outgoing. Or there's something else entirely, like good social support, that boosts both extroversion and happiness.
So it's a tangled web. Hard to untangle those threads and find the exact cause and effect.
You got it, it's complex. And while correlational research can't prove causation outright, it's amazing for exploring relationships and sparking new research ideas.
Sounds like both experimental and correlational approaches have their place. It's not about choosing a side, but using the right approach for the question you're asking.
Exactly. Experiments are great for testing cause and effect in controlled settings. Correlational studies show us how personality variables relate out in the world.
It's like having two different lenses to look at personality. One zooms in, the other gives us that wide-angle view.
Spot on. And this idea of using multiple perspective leads us to this cool concept called triangulation.
Triangulation, huh? That sounds intriguing.
It basically means we can get a more accurate, complete picture by combining data from different sources and methods. It's like using a compass, a map, and GPS to pinpoint your location.
Instead of relying on just one piece of evidence, you're looking for confirmation from multiple sources.
Right. If we see those same patterns pop up across S data, I data, B data, and different study designs, then we can be more confident in our conclusions.
Like a lawyer building a case, right? The more evidence you have from different places, the stronger your argument.
Exactly. It highlights how personality research is a process. We're always adding to what we know.
This whole thing reminds me of the nature versus nurture debate. Are we trying to figure out how much personality comes from our genes versus how we were raised?
You're making some great connections. The experimental versus correlational debate does have some of those same themes. Experimental methods where you're manipulating things sometimes feel more like nurture, like you're shaping the personality.
While correlational studies observing what's already there maybe feel more nature-focused, like acknowledging that some traits are kind of built-in and stable.
That's a great point. But just like with nature versus nurture, we now know it's a complex mix of both genes and environment. The experimental and correlational debate isn't about choosing one or the other.
It's about recognizing that both approaches are valuable and even stronger when used together.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the power of triangulation. By mixing data from different sources, we can start to unravel that complex tapestry of influences that shape who we are.
I'm really enjoying this deep dive. We've learned about those four main types of data: reliability, validity, research designs, and this debate between experimental and correlational approaches. It's like having a new way to look at ourselves and others.
That's the cool thing about personality research. It's both intellectual stimulating and personal. It makes you think about yourself, question assumptions, and just appreciate how diverse we all are.
We've covered a lot of ground. What's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this discussion?
That understanding personality is a journey, not a destination. It's not about putting people in neat little boxes, but recognizing that we're all complex and unique. As we learn more about ourselves and others, we can build stronger relationships, make better choices, and live more meaningful lives.
Well said. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop being fascinated by the human personality. We'll be back in a moment to wrap up this deep dive into personality research. All right, we're back. So we've talked about how researchers study personality, but now I'm thinking, what can we actually do with all this knowledge? Like, how does it work in real life?
Great question. It's like we've got all the puzzle pieces, now what? Well, one area where this research has made a big impact is the workplace.
Yeah, makes sense. Employers definitely want to hire the right people for the right jobs. Wouldn't want a super shy person leading the sales team, right?
Exactly. Personality tests are used all the time for hiring and team building, trying to match people with roles that fit their strengths.
Our sources mention how understanding personality can even help managers be better leaders, knowing how to get the best out of their team.
It's like a coach figuring out what motivates each player, right?
Totally. One size doesn't fit all when it comes to like motivation and communication. What about relationships? Does personality come into play there?
Big time. Research actually shows that certain traits can predict how happy and long-lasting relationships will be, like couples who are high in agreeableness, being kind and cooperative, and conscientiousness, being organized and responsible, tend to have smoother relationships.
Interesting. So it's not just about liking the same things, it's also about those deeper personality traits.
For sure. And understanding your own personality and your partner's can help you handle disagreements better and appreciate each other's quirks.
This makes me think about personal growth. Can we use personality insights to, like, improve ourselves?
Definitely. Knowing your strengths and weaknesses can be super helpful. Let's say you're naturally introverted, but you want to be more comfortable socially. You can work on managing your energy and practicing social skills.
So it's not about changing who you are, but working with what you've got.
Right, like playing a video game. Know your character's strengths, know their weaknesses, then you can strategize to level up.
This has been such a cool journey into the world of personality, from how researchers gather data to the big debates and even real-world applications. It's like we've got this whole new way of seeing ourselves and everyone around us.
And that's what's so awesome about personality research. It's thought-provoking and personal. Makes you curious about yourself, question what you think you know, and appreciate how diverse we all are.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to remember?
I think the big takeaway is that understanding personality is an ongoing journey. It's not about labeling people, but realizing we're all complex and unique. The more we learn about ourselves and each other, the better we can connect, make choices, and ultimately live more meaningful lives.
Love that. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never lose that fascination with human personality. This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.